Welcome back to Marshall Live. Okay, let's talk about that other great scandal of the century, the West's war on cheap and reliable energy. Under the cover of all things green, trillions of dollars in public money is in the process of being funneled off into private companies. The only reason no one is rioting in the streets is because people vaguely believe that they're going to die. Now, it's moments like these where we need Ross Cameron to come on and say climate change in that Halloween-esque tone that he uses. Maybe next time. Look, we're about to invite Stephen Tripp on to talk about the latest wind projects planned for the east coast of Australia. So yes, if you're watching this show and you live in New South Wales or Queensland, those beautiful beach views that you know and love are about to be destroyed. But before we do that, I wanted to share with you two hideous and hilarious monstrosities of net zero that were unveiled in recent weeks. China's Mingyang company has launched its twin-rotor floating wind turbine, which they're dragging out into Typhoon Alley, that bit of water between China and Taiwan, to harness the power of the world's strongest winds. But, don't worry if the whole thing falls to bits. Those praising the project insist, and I quote, "Weather systems are flying off kilter as climate change continues to advance." A different company, putting these things in Norway and the Celtic Sea, are also expected to complete these projects by around 2030, 2040, and I'm sure they're going to cross Chris Bowen's desk sometime soon, so expect to see them at a beach near you. And then we have the most hilarious midlife crisis-looking wind project around. Technically, this is called the Wind Catcher, but I like to refer to it as Resident Seaville. Bonus points to my sci-fi fans who get that reference. Basically, this thing is 300 metres high, 350 metres wide, and has 117 wind turbines mounted to the scaffolding. It's the stuff of nightmares if you happen to identify as a seagull. Now, we seem to have entered a green arms race where everything has to be bigger and more expensive and more sharp and have more spinny things on it. I mean, you can read impressive technical specs for these things all day long. But I do have one question. Is it green? With that much steel and concrete, the answer is obviously no. This movement has totally lost sight of its purpose. We are joined by Stephen Tripp, host of the Ex-Candidates podcast. Stephen, you've got some strong views on wind energy. I mean, you're at the rally to oppose the Illawarra offshore wind proposal. Are coastal communities changing their minds about these offshore wind farms?
Well, it appears that when they're faced with these projects head on, they are changing their minds because they're seeing the absurd planning that's coming out, the absurd numbers. The offshore wind project that's off the coast of the Illawarra is going to be over 1,000 square kilometres. To put that into perspective, Singapore is about 736 square kilometres, and New York City is 790 square kilometres. This is going to be over 1,000 square kilometres, which I couldn't believe. I was standing there on the stage speaking to the rally, looking out at their pristine coastline, which, look, we live in a beautiful country here in Australia. We have a responsibility to protect this country and its landscape. And this proposal to put wind turbines off the coast of the Illawarra is going to jeopardise that landscape and also the marine life and everything that goes along with it. But speaking to some of the locals down there, I was completely blown away with the size of this project. And one of them said to me, "You should hear what they're doing down in Gippsland in Victoria." So I went away and looked at the 5 offshore wind projects that they're planning for Australia. The Illawarra is actually the smallest. The Gippsland project is going to be 15,000 square kilometres. Like, what are we doing in this country? It's complete and utter madness.
Well, the only news story to come out of these reckless renewables protests, and there's been quite a few of them, was a dig at Barnaby Joyce, whose comments likening ballot papers to bullets was seen as an opportunity by Chris Bowen and Albanese to call for his resignation, as if they never use colourful political language in their careers. I mean, as for the protests themselves, are they having an effect? Because regional communities tend to be small. You're not going to get 1 million people on the street shouting at these politicians.
Well, I was impressed by the turnout. I thought it was fantastic, the turnout on the day. As you said, these are smaller communities, so you're not going to see huge protests that you might see here in Sydney or Melbourne. And the problem is a lot of people in Sydney and Melbourne that are voting for people like Chris Bowen in McMahon or Tanya Plibersek in Sydney, Anthony Albanese in Granler, or all the Teals that I'm surrounded here in the Northern Beaches. A lot of these projects are out of sight and out of mind, and it's really up to these smaller rural, regional country communities to stand up and push back against this stuff, because unfortunately people in the cities are not seeing it. They're not seeing the scale that these projects are being rolled out. I was talking to Wade Northhausen, a farmer down in Victoria yesterday, and he said, look, the Victorian government admitted that it's going to take 70% of the agricultural land in Victoria to roll out wind and solar to achieve net zero. And I was thinking to myself, surely that can't be the case. I went away and I researched it last night, and I found the document. Now, the Victorian government has since deleted the document, but what it was doing, it's still out there on the net. You can still find it. What they were using the argument that to get to net zero with wind and solar, they would need 70% of the agricultural land in Victoria to do it. Can you imagine taking away 70% of our agricultural land? That means no more food on the table, no more farming. We're going to be completely reduced in that area. So they were advocating, well, we don't have the land, the scope of land on shore to do these projects. Now we need to move offshore. And that's why we're staring down the barrel of these offshore wind turbines.
I've actually seen that document, and I luckily screen capped it because I used it in an article for The Spectator. Because yes, they are taking up agricultural land, and they haven't been honest about how much of that land they're going to require. Not only that, Stephen, look, I think it was a Melbourne university that said they're going to use about $7 trillion of taxpayer money by 2060 for this whole net zero transition. So you've got $7 trillion of public money sitting there versus a few communities who are unhappy. Surely the money is going to win out on this one rather than democracy.
And the other side will always say, well, if nuclear was the best option or coal was the best option, then the private sector would get behind it. The private sector are getting behind wind and solar. Well, that's because of the huge government subsidies that come along with it. It's almost free money. Some of these projects don't even get to the approval stage, and these companies still get paid for it. So it's a win-win for them. The best way to make the best way to make money nowadays, it seems, is through these government subsidies. So if you're a regional community pushing back against this sort of stuff, like for example, out in Dubbo or Dunedin or Mudgee, Coolah, these Wellington city, little country towns like that, they're all within this renewable energy zone, which is called the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone. It's over 20,000 square kilometres of renewable energy projects congested in this area. Now, that's only one of 5 renewable energy zones planned for New South Wales. There's others. There's one in North New England. The Illawarra's got one. The Hunter Central Coast region has got one. So there's 5 of them around New South Wales, all in regional communities. You don't see these projects being built in the city. You don't see them being built in Anthony Albanese's electric. You don't see a wind tower in Marrickville. And if you actually go on Zali Steggall's website, and I've been saying this at every rally I go to, I say it on podcasts, I say it wherever I go, because I need to point this out. If you go to Zali Steggall's website, on her policy page, on what Zali stands for, she says that she does not support wind farms along Warringa's beachfront. And she talks about a joke petition to put wind turbines on Manly's beach. Well, it's not a joke for people living in the country that have to face this stuff on their back doorstep. I was speaking to a gentleman recently who has a wind turbine in his area, and he had to put up mattresses and pillows and everything on his windows to block out the sound from these wind turbines, the hum that does not stop. And he can't sleep at night. He came to Sydney for a forum, and he said, normally when you go to someone's house that you're not used to, you don't sleep very well. He slept like a baby because he was finally away from the hum from these wind turbines.
Yes, well, we actually threw up a screen grab of that aversion to having wind turbines in teal seats. These people, these teals who are elected on net zero money, on the idea of renewables and green energy, they say, well, I drive an electric vehicle and I've got solar panels on my roof. Therefore, we don't have to corrupt our beautiful beaches with these wind turbines. But what they're admitting in their reluctance to take up offshore wind turbines is that they are bad for the environment. They are terrible for the view. People do not like them. I mean, when you look out toward the ocean right now, you see beautiful, pristine blue curves of water. Are you going to see these wind turbines? Is the government lying about how these finished projects are going to look?
Well, according to the Illawarra community, yes, they are lying. They put up some visualizations on the government website, and they turned down the occupancy of the images. So they become see-through. So it looks like in these images you can't see the wind turbines, but they're only 20 kilometres off the coast. If you're living in Cronulla, it's going to be 26 kilometres off the Cronulla coast line. If you go on the Centrepoint Tower, it's called Sydney Tower now. I still call it Centrepoint Tower because I'm from the 90s. But you go on their website, they boast that if you can go up to their viewing deck, you can see the Blue Mountains, which are 80 kilometres away. These are only going to be 20 kilometres away. They're going to be standing 260 metres tall. How are you not going to be able to see these wind turbines? So, look, I know a lot of people focus on the views, and that's going to be significant, but there's also significant environmental issues that come along with all these projects, whether they be wind and solar on land or wind turbines out to sea. Michael Schellenberger did a fabulous documentary in the United States where they already have some of these projects, and they're seeing large amounts of whales wash up on shore dead from the sound of these turbines out at sea. So there's a lot of environmental issues that come along with these projects. Apparently we're saving the world by going down the path of net zero, but in the process we're destroying so much of our precious environmental landscapes.
I've always found it interesting that the same people who shriek and carry on about the state of the Great Barrier Reef, which is doing fine, by the way, are the exact same groups of eco-fascists, I call them, who are happy for us to plant wind turbines directly into our coral reefs, both on the West Australian coast and on the east coast, and they don't seem to have a problem with pouring concrete over the reefs. You're just not allowed to drive your car to work. That's their real issue. But the final question here, you've done a lot of work in this industry and in this area. I don't know if you remember, but there were a couple of wave machines that were meant to be the next big green thing in energy that were down the south coast, and they both broke immediately and sank, and they were stuck in the bay forever, and everyone was bickering over who's going to get rid of these things, and in the end they're still there, effectively. What about these hundreds and thousands of wind turbines we're putting in the ocean? Who is going to get rid of them in 10 to 15 years? Or are we going to have these rusting tombstones to net zero?
Well, that's a huge question, because we know that these turbines and solar panels only last at best 20 years, 25 years. We're going to be replacing them all the time. Just think of the maintenance that comes along with that. We know a lot of these catch fire. In the case of solar panels, you have a hailstorm and now the whole solar factory is wiped out. These are big questions that are not answered. They're just pushed out there. There's so much money behind them. There's big problems or big questions about the decommissioning. Now some farmers are quite happy to host wind turbines on their properties, but because they receive a lease, they're receiving money to host these turbines. But what happens when you decommission them? With mining, they have to have in their contract that they will rehabilitate the land after the mining is completed. Well, with these wind turbines, it seems that if some of these companies that install them then sell them and or maybe declare bankruptcy, is going to be the farmer holding the bag of having to clean up the mess when it's all said and done. So there's massive questions, and this is why we say that it's a reckless rollout of these projects. They're just pushing them on everyone, but the communities are finally waking up and saying, hang on, we have a lot of questions about this, we have a lot of pushback about this, and the government is just steamrolling it through and pushing it through, and unfortunately we're seeing the consequences.
I can tell you exactly who's going to pay for the cleanup. It's going to be you, and it's going to be me, and it's going to be every other taxpayer who's going to pay for the cleanup, because these companies will be out of there. They're not going to pay for this. But look, thank you. That's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us today on Marshall Live.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And that's all from us tonight, but you can catch me tomorrow on Spectator TV. We'll be continuing the conversation about freedom of speech with our UK guests.